Hello and welcome. I'm Jane Hanson. And today, in the arena, time off for good behavior, what you need to know about indulgences and why they're now back in the news. If you think indulgences went out with Martin Luther in the Middle Ages, think again. The church has been aggressively promoting them, especially during this year devoted to St. Paul. But if you're baffled about just what are they and don't know a plenary from a planetarium, sit tight. Joining me to talk about this is Father Kieran Harrington, the Vicar of Communications for the Diocese, and Msgr Andrew Vaccari, Chancellor for the Diocese. Adding a little more context, our contributor, Grant Gallicho, Associate Editor of the magazine Commonweal. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. Okay, I'm a little skeptical about this, and I think a lot of New Yorkers might be. What exactly is an indulgence?
I think an indulgence is really the church's way of saying that temporal punishment due to sin can be mitigated based on a disposition and based upon that process of moving towards conversion, moving closer to being more like Christ. And I think that there's a lot of disagreement about how does the church quantify this time in the afterlife. I mean, is this something about earning salvation? I mean, of course, this is fodder for a lot of anti-Catholics who kind of say this is Catholic magic once again. But I think it's a timely and important discussion because it really gets to the heart of what we're really about as a church, and that is the conversion of the human person.
All right, so we've got plenary and partial indulgences, which means essentially that by doing certain actions here, you get time off from purgatory and before going to heaven in the afterlife. Okay, so what is a plenary indulgence?
Well, typically, a plenary indulgence in this year of St. Paul can be achieved in our diocese by going to a church that is dedicated to St. Paul, by going to confession. So one is free from sin, one is free from the attachment to sin, one has received Holy Communion, one has prayed for the intentions of the Holy Father. So basically, that's how one gains an indulgence. What does the indulgence do? The indulgence is something which is salutary for the person themselves, the person who has received the indulgence, or it is something which can be applied to someone who has gone before us in the faith. And the concept there is the notion that as a people of faith, this communion of saints, we are all related to one another. Just because someone has died doesn't mean that I'm disconnected from them. And in the same way that you might say to me, you know, Father Kieran, can you say a prayer for me today? I'm going to a doctor's appointment, and I would pray for you. In the same way that I also pray for the dead.
So when we talk about indulgences, though, the concept has really, it's been around forever, for as long as the church has existed, but we really haven't talked about it for a long time. Msgr, why is suddenly there so much attention paid to this?
Well, I think we've lost something by dropping the topic. It wasn't completely dropped, but it wasn't talked about very much. And I think to go back historically, maybe there was a sense of public penance in the church. There was a period of penance, and I think it was derived from that if somebody had committed serious sin, there would be a length of time before they could be readmitted to Holy Communion. And over time, it developed that this could be shortened by extraordinary acts of service, of charity, of prayer. And so I think that maybe visible notion helps us understand a little bit more. And I think now it's coming back because the church is trying to help us on this process of conversion, to grow spiritually. It's basically a spiritual concept, not something we can just put into a container, but to help us grow spiritually to become more like Christ, which is what we're called to be. And the indulgence is meant to help us and to be an incentive for us so that we can continue in growing spiritually.
Grant, as a journalist, do you buy this?
I do a little bit. I mean, I'm certainly sympathetic to the idea of urging Catholics to return to confession and urging them to direct their prayers outwardly, you know, so that you're not always praying for, you know, your own car, you know, at the shop or whatever, but so that you're focusing even on loved ones who have passed or family members or someone who was starving in Africa. But I do worry that some of the minutiae, some of the way that the church explains how an indulgence works is not communicated clearly. I mean, I know my own thinking about it. I don't know what it means to be relieved of punishment in the afterlife for a certain period of time. And I think that's something that the church could communicate better.
I think that that's why it raises really the primary question for us is what do Catholics believe about purgatory? What is this notion of purgatory? What is it all about? It's seen as like a way station between heaven on your way to heaven, a way station on your way to heaven, this middle period between heaven and hell, and that's really not what it is. And I think that a correct understanding of what purgatory is about is really key to understanding the whole question of indulgences, because a person in purgatory, the notion that some people have is that you have to be punished by God, that God wants to punish you for your sins. And that's really not the Catholic understanding of purgatory, right? The Catholic understanding of purgatory is that this is a period of reconciliation. I sort of describe it in these ways. Two ways to look at it. One is when you wake up in the morning and the lights are all off. As soon as you turn the lights on, your eyes burn for a moment. Why? You're adjusting. Right? That's sort of like what we are as people of faith, right? We're people who live in the midst of the world. Sometimes our lives are clouded by sin, the darkness of sin. We enter into the presence of God, this beautiful light, and certainly it takes a moment for our eyes to adjust. The other thing I would say is that, in terms of sin, right? If I'm playing ball and I break my arm, right? I go to the doctor sets my arm is fixed. At the same time, the consequence of breaking my arm remains, right? What purgatory is about is restoring that arm to that place prior to it being broken. So it's completely healed. The scarring, the effects of sin are really healed.
But here, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think you're right, and I also think that our understanding of sin is very important.
Critical.
What does sin do? How does it have an impact? I think it's easy to overlook the very serious nature of sin and how it affects the individual as well as others in society, because it is contrary to the way God has designed us and the way God has made us to be. He's made us to be holy. He designed us and created us in beauty, in love, in goodness. But sin eats away at that. And I think we've lost a little bit of how much it eats away at that. And I think that's another reason, going back to what you said before, why is it coming back now? I think it's also to help us understand that sin has a very real and powerful impact on a relationship, on the relationship that we have with God.
One of the, as I understand this definition of indulgences, it talks about what you have to do, and it says going to communion and confession, as we've discussed. But it also says that you achieve complete detachment from any inclination to sin. So how does that fit in with being a human being?
I think what it really goes to is what your intent, what your desire is, right? And when Stephen was speaking about that, God created us, right? We remember about the Baltimore Catechism. Why did God create me? To know and to love Him, right? To serve Him. And so when we think for a moment about what holiness is that it's what really is our desire. Is our desire to be mired in the world of sin? Is our focus really inward, focusing on our self-satisfaction, or is really our focus really on completely serving the Lord? I think that what that means is that this inclination from sin is that I really want to be holy. I want to be good. I want to be what God has created me to be. And that is how one is able to receive the effects of an indulgence. You see, sometimes we think about it as the church is granting the indulgence, and I think that what the church is really doing is facilitating the circumstances where I can enter into a deeper relationship with the Lord, because I'm identifying with Jesus Christ, and I'm trying to be more like Him. Again, it's not magic. It's not the quid pro quo. I do this, and I get that. That's key, that it's not that relationship where I can simply put the coin in the meter and I get the time off. It's really about a change in the orientation of my life.
And with this condition, it's not easy.
Right,
it's not easy.
That's true,
because it's often billed as something that is cheap and the church is just giving this out. It requires that inner conversion that God calls us to, so that we can live the way we are made, to know, love, honor, serve God with my whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. They're beautiful, beautiful words, very difficult commandments to follow.
You know, the New York Times has actually done us a great service, right? I mean, to get a front page story in the New York Times speaking about indulgences, which has generated an enormous amount of chatter, not just in Catholic circles, but beyond Catholic circles, I think gives us an opportunity to focus on these very important questions. It gives us the opportunity to focus on the question of sin. What is the destructive nature of sin? What does sin do in my life? What's the consequence of my sin to the broader world beyond me? I think it gives us the opportunity to focus on what is it that I've been created for, my own journey, this conversion of faith. I think that really this is the starting point. It gives us an opportunity to have a discussion on something which is very complicated, because as we can see right here based on this discussion, it's not easy to speak about things which are a mystery, right? And by their very nature, it's hard to quantify a mystery. And so I think that that's what we're really struggling with. I think that's what the church is struggling with today too.
But it's also good to have it bring up the whole issue, and there can be a discussion about it.
Definitely.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
Because we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment, so stay with us.